Oh, we have a jam-packed TECC-X this morning, so I'm gonna forge forth and try to get through this first portion relatively quickly. Thanks everybody for joining us for our May 2026 Tribal Energy and Climate Collaborative Exchange meeting. During today's meeting, we're going to have separate breakouts. The tech breakout is going to be on California tribes and wholesale electric markets, and the Tribal Climate Health Project breakout is going to be on climate adaptation through extreme heat planning part 2. And then there's going to be a bonus session today following this first hour from 11 to noon on the co-hosted by the California Public Utilities Commission on the Regional Organization for Western Energy, otherwise known as ROWE, where they are working on formation and we're trying to encourage tribal engagement. So I'm Josh Simmons, co-director of the Tribal Energy and Climate Collaborative, and we'd love it if you all could introduce yourself in the chat. And then Angie and Shasta.
Hi, everybody. Shasta. That's Angie.
You'll see us later in the breakout.
Okay, nice work. Okay, so the Tribal Energy and Climate Collaborative has 3 program areas: capacity building and technical assistance, economic and workforce development, policy and regulatory advocacy. We primarily serve the 26 member tribes of the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, but we have programming and services beyond those 26 member tribes, including statewide, such as this Tribal Energy and Climate Collaborative Exchange meeting. Angie or Shasta?
So this is the Tribal Climate Health Project, and we're partnering with TECC to bring this series on board and to you every month now. And we've been around for about 9 years, trying to make it easier for tribes to understand and prepare for the health impacts of and other impacts of climate change. So you'll hear more from us in the breakout.
Thank you. So Serena, looks like we have our events calendar now up. So you can check out our website, socaltech.org events, and we are posting events. If you would like us to post an event, I believe there's an option to submit through the event submission form. And we really want to promote the events the tribes can participate in to advance energy and climate priorities. We are also now recording and archiving these meetings, our TECC-X and also our CPUC Advancing Tribal Interests meeting series as well. So you can find that on our website. Is that at our archive link? So maybe somebody can drop that in the chat. Okay, now we're going to dash through our opportunities. If you have any opportunities that aren't mentioned, please feel free to put them in the chat. We want to highlight some key ones that we're aware of. So Strategic Growth Council has released several funding opportunities, some of which have the full NOFAs out. Notice of funding opportunities, so transformative climate communities, extreme heat, and community resilience centers. The BIA recently released their Energy and Mineral Development Program grants, which are due June 18th. California Energy Commission released its Clean Transportation Program Hydrogen Infrastructure Project Opportunity. The California Energy Commission also released its Active Transportation Program grants. We have a few CAL FIRE opportunities, including its FY 25-26 wildfire prevention grants. National Forest Foundation has its collaborative capacity grants. The FEMA Build BRIC grants, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community grants, are due on July 23rd. Hopefully you all are aware of the DOE's Unleashing Tribal Energy Development grants. The Bureau of Reclamation has its Water Smart Drought Response grants. More from the Strategic Growth Council, their Tribal Housing Pre-Development Fund grants and Tribal Capacity Building Program grants. We encourage you to apply for those, especially if you have housing-related projects. CC just released its EV Homes grants for focusing on residential. California or San Diego has its Clean Cars for All incentives. And then there's several opportunities on the horizon that we won't mention. The Strategic Growth Council is going to be hosting a workshop on its tribal housing capacity building initiative on the 28th. CARB and CalSTART have a zero emission bus workforce development roadmap workshop coming up. TECC, it has an energy efficiency audit resource rendezvous training for TECC member tribes. County of San Diego has tribal energy workshop, collaborative capacity program Q&A for tribal applications for National Forest Foundation. Angie will be collaborating with Civic Well and others at the CEEC Forum, 17th Annual CEEC Forum in June 24th, 25th in Los Angeles. And the 2026 National Tribal Health Conference hosted by National Indian Health Board in August. Several funding input opportunities, SB 54, plastic pollution mitigation fund priorities. I know Angie's closely monitoring this one and working with Cal Recycle to get out some opportunities for tribes to comment. Tribal energy workshop already mentioned. In terms of TECC-led tribal programs, TECC is the tribal engagement and outreach and technical assistance provider on behalf of SoCalRen and San Diego Regional Energy Networks. And we are helping to promote energy efficiency and other opportunities for eligible tribes. We are also working on behalf of Grid Alternatives and CARB on the Access Clean California program to help residents take advantage of incentives for zero emissions vehicles, EVs in particular. Okay, all right, we've gone through that. So let's break out. If you want to stay with me in the Tribal Energy and Climate Collaborative Exchange Room, focused on California tribes and wholesale markets, join breakout room number 2. Breakout room number 1. And if you want to join the Tribal Climate Health Projects, Tribal Climate Adaptation through Extreme Heat Planning Part 2, join breakout room number 2. The rooms are now open. I appreciate everybody being here today. We have, I think, a great lineup of speakers for the first part of our 2-part series. This is kind of more like a 101 session, although reading through the content, it's probably more like a 201 or a 301. But in terms of tribes and wholesale electric markets, it's something that's come up for a number of tech tribes. In terms of tribes, there's high voltage power through transmission that gets stepped down to distribution level power. That is what's feeding our homes and our buildings and our facilities on and off reservation. And it can be a little bit more difficult to kind of understand and understand how to participate and influence transmission markets. I think for tribes, though, it's important because tribes need high voltage power transported to them, sometimes from far away. They have access to different wholesale markets. Tribes are seeking to ensure they have sufficient capacity to power casinos, data centers, other facilities. I mean, in some cases, tribes are seeking 3-phase power. So getting access to adequate capacity is of critical importance to tribal communities and their growth and expansion. We are talking with a number of tribes that want to participate in wholesale markets. Tribes want to participate as buyers. We know of a number of tribes that are trying to procure power from the Western Area Power Authority. I believe I said that right, WAPA. And then tribes that are also trying to participate in markets as sellers. So if a tribe has a wind farm or a large-scale solar farm or even a large-scale energy storage system, to be able to participate and sell that power or that capacity. It can be challenging to consider these projects. It's a lot simpler to model and consider the implications and advantages and disadvantages of a distribution level project, a behind the meter project. But in front of the meter projects, transmission level projects are challenging. Tribes need to consider wheeling fees. We've also experienced tribes with we've experienced uncertainty by certain agencies and organizations on how to treat tribes as well. So in some cases, uncertainty by CAISO on how to treat tribes with respect to them as generators versus load-serving entities. And then tribes are also grappling with being able to manage their own power sources and dealing with departing load charges. So really, these are kind of the more granular issues we're hearing and tribes are experiencing. And I would love for the tribal participants here today to share more about what they're interested in learning about transmission. But we want to kind of step back today and consider really how the transmission wholesale markets are managed and coordinated. It is a massive effort, and there are some changes that are occurring right now in California and in the West. So we're going to start with the California Public Utilities Commission in providing an overview of what they do and some of their involvement in the markets and the resource planning. We're going to then turn it over to Western Resource Advocates, who territory has not included California previously, but is working with many other states around California and has also been supporting tribes and being able to participate in and understand transmission and wholesale markets. And then we're going to turn it over to CAISO, the California Independent System Operator, who's responsible for the coordination of transmission here in California. And I want to turn it over first to Commissioner Houck on behalf of California Public Utilities Commission, and appreciate you and everybody being here today to help give us kind of this primer to better understand this space.
Thank you, Josh. Really appreciate being able to provide some information about what we do at the Public Utilities Commission. Want to thank TECC for hosting this meeting. I know we've gotten a lot of questions at the Commission from tribes on a lot of the subjects you just have created their own utilities or are buying or selling electricity that they're purchasing in various ways. We have the first tribal transmission owner here in California. And as we're seeing, energy is a critical necessity, and many tribes are concerned about reliability, safety, and affordability, all of the things that we as regulators are charged with ensuring. Many tribes in rural areas are facing disproportionate public service power shutoffs, and they're also in areas where we're looking at transmission infrastructure growth, and tribes are growing their economies in ways where they're needing to ensure that they have reliable and secure energy. So what we're hoping to do today is provide some basics on sort of the foundation of what we do at the PUC versus what the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission does. We're going to start with looking at our integrated resource planning process, which is foundational to our work with the CAISO on transmission planning. And then we're going to talk about transmission planning and how the work that we do here at the PUC ties into that for this first hour. And we think this is critical to getting to some of the issues Josh was talking about that we can address in later sections. And as Josh mentioned, the California Independent System Operator and is also going to be talking about their role. So that'll be a complement to what we're talking about. And we're really hoping that this, again, will provide some foundation for going into the second part of this discussion at 11 o'clock, where we'll be talking more specifically about the markets and why a Western market is important to tribes and something that tribes should be looking at. So I think this will be a great first discussion, and just want to really preface that it's a first discussion, and there'll be time for questions and answers, and we're available for follow-up discussions as well. So with that, I really want to turn it over to our experts who put together presentation to walk through these issues and then hand it off to the other folks. So I'll turn it back over. I don't know if I should turn it back to you, Josh, or to Kosh Peterson to start our presentation.
Yeah, you can just have Kosh jump in.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to our experts here at the PUC. Kosh, are you?
Yep, I'm on. Thank you, Commissioner Houck. Thank you, Josh. I'm Kai Peterson, Senior Utilities Engineer at the California Public Utilities Commission. I'll cover the first half of today's presentation, focusing on California's integrated resource planning process and how it connects to transmission planning. So this is a look at statewide long-term planning of generation resources and how that feeds into transmission planning. And there's more detail on some of these slides than we have time to get into today, but they're there for your reference if you want to revisit them later. Next slide. So the CPUC, or California Public Utilities Commission, regulates investor-owned utilities in California, including PG&E, SCE, and SDG&E. We set rates, oversee procurement, and advocate for ratepayers. We work closely with two other agencies, the California Energy Commission, or CEC, which handles energy forecasting and permitting, and the California Independent System Operator, or CAISO, which operates the grid. Next slide, please. So pursuant to Assembly Bill 32, the California Air Resources Board creates a scoping plan every 5 years to achieve maximum feasible greenhouse gas reductions. That plan feeds into the CEC's energy demand forecast, which the CPUC uses in the Integrated Resource Planning process, or IRP. The next few slides focus on IRP and its connection to CAISO's transmission planning process, or TPP. IRP portfolios feed directly into CAISO's transmission planning and into procurement orders that require load-serving entities, or LSEs, to contract for new resources. Next slide, please. So let's dive into the integrated resource planning process. State bills SB 350 and SB 100 set ambitious clean energy targets for California's electric sector, including 60% renewables by 2030 and 100% zero carbon electricity by 2045. The IRP is the process by which the CPUC ensures load-serving entities develop resource portfolios that meet those targets cost-effectively while maintaining reliability. IRP takes a long-term view with a planning horizon through 2045. The CPUC also runs a separate resource adequacy program to ensure near-term reliability, requiring load-serving entities to demonstrate sufficient contracted capacity 1 year ahead with monthly updates. Next slide, please. A core part of IRP is the capacity expansion model, RESOLVE. It optimizes investments in new resources as well as economic retention of existing resources to identify the most cost-effective mix of resources, called a portfolio, needed to meet greenhouse gas targets and reliability requirements through 2045. This chart from the 2022 to 2023 IRP cycle shows the projected resource mix from 2024 to 2045. Each bar combines resources in LSE plans, below the black line, with additional resources selected by the Resolve model, above the black line. You can see that solar and battery storage make up most of the new capacity in the portfolio, with wind playing a growing role in later years as the grid pushes towards 100% zero carbon. Next slide, please. IRP portfolios serve multiple purposes. They inform LSE procurement planning, what generation resources LSEs need to contract for, and they serve as inputs to CAISO's transmission planning process. The CPUC transmits these portfolios to CAISO so it knows what generation resources are expected to come online and can plan the transmission infrastructure needed to support them. Next slide. Now I'll turn to how IRP portfolios feed into CAISO's transmission planning process. CAISO uses IRP portfolios as the starting point for its transmission planning cycle. Base case portfolios reflect CPUC policy guidance and lead to transmission solutions that go to the CAISO board for approval. Sensitivity portfolios explore alternative futures. They don't directly drive board approvals, but inform the planning process and help reduce risk. Next slide, please. The most recent IRP planning decision identified portfolios for use in the 26-27 TPP. The adopted portfolio meets California's reliability standard, charts the path toward the state's GHG targets, and positions CAISO to plan transmission cost effectively by locating clean energy resources where they provide the greatest system value. Next slide. Once the IRP portfolio is adopted, it needs to be translated from a system-level plan into specific grid locations. That's where the busbar mapping process comes in. It takes the megawatts of new capacity by resource type identified in the portfolio and assigns it to specific substations for use in CAISO's TPP. Next slide. Busbar mapping is a joint effort between CPUC, CEC, and CAISO staff, guided by a stakeholder-vetted methodology that accounts for land use, environmental constraints, and development feasibility. The iterative process allows issues to surface early before they become costly problems in the interconnection queue or environmental review. Next slide, please. Now I'll pass it off to Simon for FERC versus CPUC oversight and authority.
Great, thanks, Kai. Can everyone hear me okay? Great, thanks. I'm Simon Hurd. I'm supervisor of the FERC Cost Recovery Section and Energy Division of the CPUC. And beyond what the IRP contributes, which is huge to the TPP, understanding who has authority in getting the transmission built, overseeing the transmission system, and approving the costs that are passed on to ratepayers can be a little bit confusing, even for those of us who've been working on it for several years. The Federal Power Act grants the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, jurisdictional authority over interstate transmission system and wholesale electricity markets. The CAISO operates the transmission grid and implements the wholesale markets under FERC's regulatory authority. Authority not granted to FERC, such as regulation of retail sales and retail rates, retail customer energization, which is a big deal with data centers right now, safety and siting of the electric grid, as well as authority over the distribution grid. That all stays with the states. Individual transmission owners, like PG&E, SCE, some of the independents that we have as well in the CAISO, they ensure that their parts of the grid are functioning safely and reliably. FERC approves transmission owners' costs related to operating their part of the interstate transmission system. The costs approved by FERC are passed through the CAISO's transmission access charge, or TAC, and eventually end up on consumers' bills. Approximately 90% of those costs approved by FERC in California are allocated to retail ratepayers, who the CPUC, my team in particular with our legal division, we're mandated statutorily to advocate on behalf of retail ratepayers in FERC transmission owner rate cases. The other 10% of the costs are allocated to wholesale customers, like DWR State Water Project being one of the bigger ones, and some municipal utilities as well. While FERC approves transmission costs, the allocation of that 90% that goes to retail customers, the classes such as residential, commercial, agricultural, rate-paying classes, the design of those retail rates, that stays under the authority of the CPUC. Hope that helps. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Wilson now, who'll explain more about the CPUC's permitting authority for many of the larger CAISO-approved projects.
Thank you, Simon. Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Wilson. I am with the CEQA unit of the CEQA and FERC branch of the Energy Division. CEQA stands for California Environmental Quality Act. I'm responsible for leading a team that processes permits for transmission projects, for new projects, as well as for modification of existing projects. CPUC grants permits for certain FERC jurisdictional transmission facilities for proposed new facilities as well as existing. These include substations and transmission lines over 200 kilovolts, and for some transmission facilities less than 200 kilovolts. CPUC is not required to issue permits for what are called distribution facilities or facilities that are less than 50 kilovolts. So those are the facilities that deliver power directly to residences or commercial facilities, for example. CPUC is lead CEQA agency responsible for conducting environmental impact analyses for these facilities. We also, as a result, are lead for implementation of AB 52 consultation with tribes for these projects. For certain projects that are subject to a certain type of permit called the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, or CPCN, CPUC sets a maximum reasonable and prudent cost for these projects in that permit that we issue for those types of facilities. And then CPUC also processes another type of application. This is what's called an 851 application for what are called public/private partnerships in ownership of transmission facilities. And it's called an 851 application because it's an application submitted pursuant to Section 851 of the Public Utilities Code that regulates sharing or transfer of assets that are owned by a public utility. And then finally, all permit applications such as CPCN applications and 851 applications go through CPUC's legal proceeding process. So the public can participate as a party in that legal proceeding process, but also can comment on the CEQA document prepared for those types of applications. And I'll go to the next slide. Also, I just wanted to explain a little bit about CPUC's Office of the Tribal Advisor. This is an office housed within the Executive Director's Division. Essentially, CPUC is committed to integrating tribal concerns into our programs and policies through this Office of Tribal Advisor. And we provide information on upcoming forums and hearings and workshops through the Tribal Advisor's webpage. We also serve as a resource where we can facilitate government-to-government communications with tribes through this office. We have a link here in the presentation where you can obtain information from the website and get on the mailing list to obtain further information about upcoming events and workshops and news. And also, email address for the tribal advisor is also listed here in this presentation. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a lot there. We will be sharing the slides at the end. You also have access to the recording, so you can go back to this information. And we are turning it over now to Western Resource Advocates.
Hello, good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, awesome. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us today. Glad to be here. My name is Nadine Hubbard. I'm the Tribal Engagement Fellow with Western Resource Advocates. I am Diné Navajo from Northern Arizona, but live and work in Phoenix. And I'm joined by my colleague, Sydney Welter. She is our Regional Markets Policy Advisor. Sydney, would you like to say anything right now?
Thanks, Nadine. Just want to add it's great to join you all this morning and start this conversation. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So we'll start today with a little background on WRA, Western Resource Advocates, and the changing energy landscape in the West. And then Sydney will walk through some market basics and regional developments. And towards the end, I'll come back and share some of the major themes and perspectives that we've heard directly from tribal participants that we've worked with in the Intermountain West. Next slide, please. All right, so about WRA. So Western Resource Advocates is a regional nonprofit organization focused on climate, clean energy, air, land, and water issues across the interior West. Our work spans multiple Western states where we focus on advancing clean energy, protecting natural resources, and supporting long-term regional planning and policy development. Within the energy space specifically, WRA works on issues related to electricity markets, transmission planning, regional governance, and tribal engagement throughout the West. Over the past few years, WRA has also expanded its tribal energy engagement work by creating spaces for tribes, utilities, advocates, and regional energy organizations to come together and discuss how these systems and decisions may impact tribal communities now and into the future. With that, I'll hand it over to Sydney to walk through some of the regional market developments happening across the West.
Thank you, Nadine. Yes, I'm going to chat today about wholesale electricity markets in the West. So when we're talking about wholesale electricity markets, we're talking about generation and transmission, the sale of electricity in bulk between utilities and generators. We're not so much talking about like the distribution lines to your homes or businesses, but kind of that front end portion of the electric grid. And I do apologize. This is a lot of information to condense into a short presentation, and there are a lot of acronyms, but we have resources on some of these acronyms we can provide if that is helpful afterward. But overall, we wanted to share this information with you today because things are changing in the West very rapidly. We are in the midst of our energy transition, and a key part of that is our movement towards regional coordination for electricity. With that regional coordination, we have a better understanding of how the Western electric grid works and can access our diverse hydro, solar, wind resources we have across our states. So the West is moving towards regional wholesale electricity markets. Markets are important to balance reliability, cost savings, and clean energy goals. They are a key part of our energy transition. And most of the US and Canada already operates in markets known as RTOs, Regional Transmission Organizations, or ISOs, Independent System Operators. But the West is just entering the phase of exploring those markets, most of the West, with the exception of California, of course, part of the California ISO, who will give a presentation after this. But the West has really developed an incremental approach to markets, which means there's still a big opportunity to influence these markets and how our energy future develops. So now is an important time to get involved to shape the future of Western energy. And we can move to the next slide. And I'll pass things back to Nadine for a little bit more context.
Great. Thank you, Sydney. So why does this moment matter for tribes? Over the past year, WRA has hosted a Tribal Energy Markets and Transmission Workshop series. This series really brought together tribal leaders, tribal utilities, advocates, regional energy organizations, and really just energy experts from across the West to discuss electricity markets, transmission planning, and these regional governance changes. One thing that we heard consistently throughout these conversations was that tribes are paying attention because these decisions can directly impact tribal communities in both the near term and long term. That includes things like future transmission development, access to reliable and affordable power, clean energy development opportunities, infrastructure investment, and how tribal priorities are represented in these regional planning and governance discussions. We also heard a growing recognition that these conversations are not only about energy policy, they're also about sovereignty, economic development, infrastructure planning, and protecting tribal priorities for future generations. And because many of these regional systems and governance structures are still evolving across the West, tribes still have an opportunity to help shape how engagement happens and how tribal voices are represented moving forward. Next slide.
Great. I will just touch briefly on some of the regulation and decision making behind markets. There are a lot of entities involved at different levels of shaping Western markets and transmission. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has regulatory oversight over markets, but a lot is left to state commissions who regulate the utilities who are participating in those markets. So, of course, we've heard from the commission this morning, but commissions in all of our Western states are really shaping the future of our joint electric grid. And just want to preview, there will be conversations in the second hour about governance, how decisions are made at each individual utility or market operator. And that is a key area that tribes and various clean energy interests like ourselves can continue to influence markets. So we can go to the next slide. And I just want to talk about the different types of utilities in the West and a little bit about how they are considering markets. So we have our federal utilities. We have a few BIA run utilities like the Colorado River Agency Electrical Services. We also have power marketing administrations. Those are federal hydropower agencies like the Western Area Power Administration. And we see all the different regions of WAPA in the map to the right. We also have investor-owned utilities, for-profit, privately owned utilities that serve most customers in the U.S. and are state regulated. So you think of any of the major, the big utilities in California. And we also have municipal utilities overseen by local governments, co-op utilities that are primarily intended to electrify rural areas, and then, of course, our tribal utilities, which continue to increase in number across the West. And all of these types of utilities are considering markets as we expand markets into the West, but all have different levels of influence in shaping those markets. And we can go to the next slide. So I don't want to overload anyone with information today on all of these acronyms, but just wanted to give a little bit of context for how the West has developed for some of our presenters later today. So we have different types of markets. I mentioned the West is really taking an incremental approach to markets. So most utilities in the West have been participating in CAISO's Western Energy Imbalance Market, which helps balance supply and demand, address some shortages in real time, like within an hour. And that has the CAISO Western EIM has been operating for more than a decade now and produced numerous cost savings and efficiencies. And now we're really at the stage where most utilities in the West are considering day-ahead markets. There are two markets entering the West, CAISO's Extended Day-Ahead Market, EDAM, which launched just this month with PacifiCorp, and other utilities like LADWP, NV Energy will be joining EDAM. Then we also have Southwest Power Pool, that is an RTO based in the central US, which is also launching a day-ahead market known as Markets Plus. That's set to launch in late 2027 to include Bonneville Power Administration, the big Arizona utilities. And then we also, of course, have our independent system operators and regional transmission operators. CAISO, of course, has been managing most of California and one co-op in Nevada for years. And then the Southwest Power Pool, SPP, in April of this year expanded into the West, primarily in Colorado and Wyoming. So I wanted to share all of this. There's a lot on this map here just to say things are in this state of rapid development. We are still figuring things out for the West, trying to better understand how this will impact tribes, tribes as utilities, tribes as governments, tribes as energy producers and purchasers. So a lot of things to look at here, but again, this is a critical point in time to influence all of these markets as they are entering the West. And with that, I will pass things back to Nadine.
Great. Thanks, Sydney. So now that we've heard more about the technical side of wholesale electricity markets, I just want to briefly ground this conversation in what WRA has been hearing directly from tribes across the Intermountain West through our workshop series. And I'll admit, even after being in this work for about a year and a half now, these systems can still feel incredibly complex sometimes. Before joining WRA, I worked in water conservation. So stepping into the energy space meant learning an entirely new language, acronyms, governance structures, markets. But one thing that I've realized through this work, and especially listening to our tribal partners, is that these systems are complicated in part because they were never originally designed with tribes in mind. And as Sydney stated, we are in a really important moment right now. Many of these governance structures are still evolving, which means tribes still have the opportunity to shape how engagement happens, how tribal priorities are represented, and what these systems will look like in the long term. So I've noticed that there's a lot of momentum right now around tribal engagement in the energy space. The pathways are not always clear yet, and many of these systems are still developing, but that does create space for tribes to provide input before these decisions become fully locked in. So before I dive deeper into the themes that we've heard from our workshops, I just want to recognize that California tribes have their own unique experiences, governance structures, and priorities. So we're not here to say that California tribes' experiences are identical to tribes in other regions, but I did just want to share some of the themes and concerns that we've heard consistently, because many of these broader questions around representation, transparency, infrastructure, and engagement may resonate here as well. So let's dive into the themes here. First, we've heard really that tribes want earlier and more meaningful engagement in regional decision-making processes. We repeatedly heard that tribes do not want to be brought into conversations after projects, after governance structures or planning pathways are already mostly decided. There was a strong emphasis on engagement happening early enough for tribal perspectives to genuinely influence outcomes. We also heard a very clear message that tribes want to be recognized and engaged as sovereign governments, not simply treated as stakeholders alongside everyone else in these processes. Another major theme was transparency. Many participants are still trying to understand where these decisions are actually being made, who holds authority within these governance structures, how regional planning processes work, and where can tribes meaningfully engage before these decisions become finalized. And honestly, one of the biggest takeaways was that there's still a real need for foundational education and relationship building in this space. So people were interested in understanding how markets function, how transmission planning affects tribal communities, what other opportunities may exist for tribal utilities or energy development, and really how to navigate these regional structures. But beyond the technical side, many participants framed these conversations much more broadly. They connected them to sovereignty, long-term infrastructure planning, economic opportunity, energy resilience, and protecting tribal priorities over time. So one thing that stood out to us throughout the workshop series was how valuable it was for tribes to learn from one another directly. Hearing experiences, concerns, and strategies across different regions and different levels of engagement. And while these conversations can sometimes feel very technical or policy heavy, what we heard consistently was that tribes want to be involved now, while these systems are still evolving, rather than trying to navigate them after decisions have already been finalized. So with that, we really appreciate the opportunity to share some of what we've been hearing, and we're happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Nadine and Sydney. We don't have time for questions right now since we still have hopefully just 5 minutes for CAISO, and we'll be able to have a few questions at the end, but please drop your questions in the chat. If we don't get to them during the session, we will respond after the event as well. But thank you so much, and I will turn it over to Shannon.
Great, thank you so much. I'm Shannon O'Rourke, and the Director of California Regulatory Affairs at the California Independent System Operator, or the California ISO, or the CAISO. Serena, just so I can kind of keep it to 5 minutes, I might ask you to just skip to some different slides instead of following the total path. But first here, just by way of background, there's two primary grids within the United States, the Eastern Interconnection and the Western Interconnection. And these two grids are independent synchronous electrical grids that are internally connected and synchronized, but have only limited connections between them. So this allows power to flow relatively freely within each interconnection, but not between the two different interconnections. If you could go to slide 5 next, please. Thank you. So electricity sales are generally divided into two categories, wholesale and retail. A wholesale sale occurs earlier in the supply chain. This is when electricity is sold from a generator to a reseller. Typically, the reseller is a utility or another load-serving entity. Load-serving entity is what we call an entity like a utility that has the responsibility to serve end-use customers and meet their demand. The wholesale transactions take place in organized markets like the ones CAISO operates, and the retail sales occur at the end of the chain. This is when the electricity is sold by a local utility or provider directly to homes and businesses. So wholesale is bulk power transactions in the markets the CAISO runs, while retail is what customers ultimately see on their electric bill from their utility. We could go to slide 8. So this slide just summarizes the CAISO's main responsibilities. Like many other independent system operators, the California ISO is a nonprofit public benefit corporation. We are not a government agency, and we're regulated by the federal government, by FERC. So we're responsible for the flow of electricity, but unlike a utility, we're profit neutral and independent, and we do not serve any end-use customers. We operate the transmission system, but not distribution lines. Those are operated and maintained by the utilities, who also perform maintenance on generators and transmission systems. Unlike the utilities, we don't own any transmission or generation assets, and we do not take ownership of the energy on the system. In our role, we do facilitate a fair and transparent wholesale electricity market. And as was mentioned by the CPUC earlier, we have a comprehensive transmission planning process to accommodate the need for system expansion, as well as a clear way for clean resources to access the grid. Next slide, please. So as a grid operator, the CAISO makes sure the lights stay on in our balancing authority area. As a market operator, we support reliability by running markets for energy and capacity. We use these markets to balance supply and demand across our footprint and ensure that we're operating the transmission system within its appropriate limits. Running the market really provides price transparency, and it's something that's reflective of the broader system conditions. Next slide, please. Just really briefly, in our role as transmission planner, we conduct an annual process to create a long-term transmission plan to address the load growth as forecasted by the California Energy Commission and support state energy goals to bring resources online with the planning that's done by the California Public Utilities Commission in their integrated resource planning process, which they talked about earlier, also to reduce costs. I also wanted to identify we're in the process right now of developing a tribal engagement policy around our long-term transmission planning process, and we can share info with TECC to share with you all on how to participate in that process. If you could go to slide 12. Thank you. And this will be my last slide. So turning to the wholesale electricity market that the CAISO runs, our wholesale electricity market is comprised of distinct day-ahead and real-time processes. The energy products and services traded in our market allow us to meet reliability needs and to serve load. So the day-ahead market procures resources to meet reliability needs a day in advance and make sure there are adequate resources to deliver in real time. Historically, our day-ahead market has only been for our balancing authority area, but with the launch of the extended day-ahead market this past May, that footprint is expanding to other balancing authority areas, and we'll talk about that more in the second hour. The day-ahead market also allows entities with bilateral agreements to schedule their contracted energy and demand into the market. Most demand in our balancing authority area is met in advance of the market through utility-owned or bilateral resources. The real-time market operates across a larger footprint than just our balancing authority area. It includes 24 participating entities across the West, and it's called the Western Energy Imbalance Market. It's the hour-ahead scheduling process, which enables import and export resources to schedule their megawatts hourly. Also to integrate variable resources like solar and wind. There's a 5-minute market that's intended to meet instantaneous demand that shows up in the real time. So there's additional slides that can be transmitted after, but with that, I'll conclude my presentation here. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. It looks like we can maybe have a question or two in the next session. It's going to close this one right now. In 4 seconds, so we'll see you all in the main room, I guess.
I think a lot of folks around California are definitely dealing with extreme heat. And we hear it all the time from the tribes that we're really honored to support and serve, from tech tribes in Southern California for sure are dealing with the impact of more extreme heat, as are many of our Tribal Climate Health Project tribal advisors that we're really fortunate to work with, and tribes that I get to work with through Tribal Capacity Building Program from Strategic Growth Council, and tribes basically all over the state. If they weren't already hot, they're starting to experience the effects of more extreme heat. And we all know that it's getting hotter, but we don't always have a good idea of what the impact of that heat is going to look like when it hits our particular community. And so for the tribes I get to work with, that means a lot of different things. It might mean that elders and children are in more danger due to heat-related illness, or perhaps it's power outages that are affecting cooling or the access to medical treatments like dialysis. We see a range of impacts, from access to outdoor activity or cultural resources that affect physical health or even spiritual health in terms of access to our resources. We see ecological differences like our riparian creek habitats getting overgrown, or traditional food sources or agricultural products under threat. And greater allergens or various kinds of ozone and smog pollutants that are leading to respiratory problems. So it's important that we have this kind of information available to us. Some of this information is available to tribes. It is publicly accessible, but it's often in so many different places, and it's not necessarily presented in a way that we call community ready. So like credible, meaningful, relevant, easy to understand, ready for you to like communicate it to tribal council and your community members and funders too. So the EISI for the Exposures, Impacts, and Strategies Inventory tool, EISI, was originally designed as an Excel tool started about 9 years ago to reduce the burden of external fact-finding for tribal climate vulnerability assessments. So you can braid all this publicly accessible information together more easily alongside your own tribe's perspectives, knowledge, and values. And so we provided a lot of tools and trainings, templates, and direct support to tribes across the country, especially here in California over the last 9 years, and including administering something we call the National Tribal Resilience Data Work Group. So we've just become real data focused program because we know this is a big obstacle for tribes, and doing some of their adaptation work is really having the information available to them. So, we have a lot going on in this space, not just this tool that we're going to show you, which is now an online extreme heat version of the EISI tool, which is an interactive web-based tool specifically focused on extreme heat. We think this is our first entry point into getting into a more web-based, easy-to-use tool, which has lots of visualizations, and you get to see it all today. But we also do a lot of other things around data. We're currently working with a bunch of data experts and our tribal advisors on identifying ways to overcome wildfire health and water supply data gaps. We have a white paper coming soon. We also have a published paper coming out with our friends from affiliates of NOAA on tribal resilience data needs. We just think it's really important to uncover climate blind spots and so important to help inform meaningful action in communities. So we're really excited to debut this tool with you. It's a long time coming and it's with a long-time partner. So thanks so much to Paula, as well as our friends at the Public Health Alliance. And that means I get a chance to say hello to Colleen Bodenreiner with Public Health Alliance. And they are going to give a demo of this tool. And like I said, please interact in the chat. And the first thing I actually want you to do before we move on to that, we have a quick poll. And all we want to do here is just hear a little bit from you, and that will be mainly tribes in the room, about your heat-related planning challenges. So let's go ahead and just launch that poll.
So sorry, Angie. Once I started sharing my screen, the poll option went away. So I'm going to pause and see if that will bring it back.
Well, we can always just move along too. How about we do this? Let's do this just in the chat. Be very interested in folks in the room that are working with tribes, telling us a little bit about some of the challenges you might be facing as you work to plan for extreme heat. Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and hand off to Colleen. Thanks so much, Colleen.
Thanks, Angie. Let me share my screen. And I'll move on to the next. Okay. So yeah, thanks everybody for being here. Yeah, like Angie mentioned, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to demonstrate and train you all on this EISI for Extreme Heat online tool. It's been 2 years in the making, and it's been a really big pleasure to work with both Prosper Sustainably and Paula Band of Mission Indians over the course of those 2 years. And again, we might have a limited amount of time at the end for questions, so please put your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll do our best to answer them. All right, so what is the EISI for Extreme Heat online tool? It is a free interactive web tool that guides your tribe step by step through an extreme heat vulnerability assessment. And with the EISI for Extreme Heat online tool, you can assess your tribe's past, present, and future extreme heat exposures. You can identify related secondary exposures that are exacerbated by extreme heat, like air quality. You can evaluate extreme heat impacts and how they might impact your tribe's most important community assets. And you can discover adaptation strategies that you can consider implementing to protect your tribe from future extreme heat impacts. And the tool is really meant for tribal environmental professionals, tribal governments, tribal serving organizations, and anyone supporting tribal climate resilience. So a few practical tips before we start the demo. Going through the tool takes approximately 30 minutes. Any of the inputs that you make in the tool, which we'll talk more about during the demo, is stored in your account and is only viewable to you and site administrators. Your progress in the tool is saved automatically, and so you can leave and return at any time without worrying about your losing your progress. And yeah, you're really encouraged to engage community members early in the process. So a lot of this tool relies on you having a good understanding of your community's values and priorities with regards to extreme heat. And so we encourage you to engage your community beforehand. And the last thing that I'll say is, while the tool is organized in a step-by-step fashion, you can always go back to a previous section and modify it at any time if you change your mind or if you have an additional thought. And in terms of how to access the tool, it's a really simple process. You just go to our landing page, which is easy.healthyplacesindex.org. And you enter your email, and you'll get a one-time password sent to your account, and you can log in that way. And so with that, we'll get into our demo. All right. So once you've logged into this tool, this is what you'll see. You'll see a button that says My Inventories, and when you click on it, this is where you can find all of your saved inventories once you've created them. And in our case, we want to create a new inventory, so we'll go ahead and do that. We'll click Start Creation, and it'll set up the whole tool for us. So now that we've officially created our inventory, you can see that the tool has 7 steps laid out on this left side, and we'll walk through each of them using Polyband of Mission Indians as an example. And so the first step is to find your area. And what we're doing in this step is, before we look at any data on extreme heat exposures or impacts, we first need to select the area that represents our tribe. And this can be based on reservation boundaries, current or historical tribal lands, and/or tribe population distribution. And there's a few ways you can select a tribal area. So the first one is to use this dropdown, which contains a list of tribes. And when you click on a specific tribe, or you can also type it in and click on it, the tool automatically selects the census tracts that intersects with your tribe's boundaries. So if you click on Paula, we can see that it's automatically highlighted in red, the 2 census tracts that intersect with Paula's boundaries. The second way you can select a tribal area is by selecting census tracts directly on the map. So if I take those out, I can click on tracts around the area. I can also deselect and change the selection that way. So this is a good option if you want to include ancestral lands or things that are not tribal boundary related. For this example, I'll just use these 2 census tracts. And once you're happy with your selection, you want to click Generate Data for the selected tribe. And while that's happening, I'll just mention that you might have heard me use the word census tracts. That's really, it's a geography used by the Census Bureau, and we use it because most of our data is reported at the census tract level. All right, so after we find our area, this takes us to our next step, which is evaluating extreme heat exposures. And our goal in this step is to determine the overall risk of extreme heat to the Paula community based on the data that we see in this page and our own understanding of extreme heat in the area. And so to do that, we want to look on all of this data on extreme heat below. So we'll look at each indicator. And if you want to find out more information about an indicator, like its definition or its data source, you can just click on this blue icon. And you'll see everything about the indicator. So when you look at an indicator, you'll also see that each indicator has 4 values on the left-hand side, which shows the values for that indicator over time. So historical, current, mid-century, and end century. And to the right of these values is a trend line that visualizes that change over time. For For data that we find particularly informative and that we're interested in seeing in a summary report at the end of the tool, you could also see it right here in the sidebar. For data that you find particularly notable, you can click this Add to Community Profile button, and it'll pop up in this kind of community profile step that we'll get to in kind of at the end of the tool. But that'll just let you see a summary of the data that you find most relevant and most interesting to your tribe at the end. All right, so after we look at all this data, I might also select annual number of warm nights. We'll use the slider to select the level of risk of extreme heat that Paula faces. So it ranges from none, very low, low, medium, high, and very high. And so when we make our selection, we want to consider the data that's relevant and important to your tribe and your own understanding of extreme heat exposure in your community. And so that should be based on this data here, but it should also be based on things like community input, tribal reports, observations, and anecdotes. So in our case, we'll rank the extreme heat exposure for Paula as high. And we chose this rank because of the sharp increases in future extreme heat days and warm nights that we see here. All right. Moving on to step 3. So in step 3, we'll be evaluating secondary exposures. And these are environmental conditions that are triggered or worsened by extreme heat, like poor air quality. So for each secondary exposure in the tool, so we air quality, water contamination, and food shortage. We'll look at the data for each one and determine the overall risk of exposure, of that exposure to the Paula community using the slider. So let's use water contamination as an example. So looking at the data, we have data on drinking water contaminants, impaired bodies of water, and nitrates. And again, like in the previous section, if you want to find out more about an indicator, you can click on it and find its definition and its data source. So when you look at an indicator in this section, each indicator shows 3 things. So you'll first see the value on the left, which is the actual number for your community. So for example, for nitrates, the value is the actual concentration of nitrates in community water systems in our tribal area, which is 0.8 milligrams per liter. In the middle, you can see the percentile rank interpretation, which is a sentence that tells you how your tribal area compares to all other census tracts in California. And that's also known as a percentile rank. So in this case, we can see that our tribal area has more nitrates than only 10% of other tracts in California. So that's relatively low. As I'm looking at the data, I'm also going to take the opportunity, like in the previous step, to add any indicators to the community profile that I'm interested in. And you can see they'll show up in this sidebar over here. So after we look at the data, we'll use this slider at the top to select the level of risk that water contamination poses to Paula. And so like in the previous step, we want to consider both this data in the tool as well as any information that we have about the exposure based on community feedback, tribal reports, observations, or anecdotes. And so in this case, because of the high percentile values for drinking water contaminants and impaired bodies of water in the Paula area, we can conclude that that Paula has a high risk of water contamination. So we'll go ahead and make that selection. And that brings us to our next step after we're done looking at secondary exposures. So we arrive at this community asset step. And this step is a little bit different than the others. In this step, we're really ranking the community assets. So those are the resources and values that are important for your community to protect in the face of extreme heat. And this is a critical step because knowing which assets are most important to your tribe will help you factor in how extreme heat impacts might affect those assets in the next step. And we really highly recommend that you conduct a community survey to understand your tribal community's experiences, values, and priorities regarding extreme heat and climate change so that you can use those results to inform this section. And actually, the Tribal Climate Health Project has a survey template and other resources that you can use to help you with that, which will be posted in the chat. So for this step, we'll look at each asset. Assets are grouped into different categories, as you can see here. And we'll assign them a ranking either based on the results of the climate community survey or your understanding of your community's priorities. And so I'll go ahead and select a few of those here. Just as an example. So yeah, you can do socioeconomic health. Yeah.
Sorry, I mean, well, I do mean to interrupt because I'm interrupting. Just give me a second. Just bear in mind, we're going through this as an example. So we're not selecting something for everything, but when you do this yourself, do them all. You're going to want to do them all.
Yeah. Thank you, Shasta. And so you'll go through each of them and select it based on the survey or your understanding of your community's priorities. And also at the bottom, we have this area where you can add and rank custom assets if your tribe has specific assets that aren't represented in this broader list. So for example, Paula has a native seed library that I'll include, and it'll show up just like any other asset, and I can go ahead and rank it, and it'll go ahead. Yeah, it'll show up. So yeah, at this point, yeah, I wanna invite Angie to kind of comment on this asset section if you want to add anything.
This is kind of a unique and hallmark aspect of the process that Tribal Climate Health Project has developed, and having done a lot of tribal adaptation plans, it just seemed really important to integrate the values of the tribe into the decision-making process. And it really, when you do this in person, say you do a workshop or even a survey with folks, it's hard to rank this, but it really does matter because we don't want to just take the Western data to say that heat's going to get really bad and that dictates everything that we spend our limited time and dollars on. Tribes often want to, they want to focus on the things that they want to protect the most. It's a tough decision-making process, but it shows up later on as we look at impacts to help us better rank and inform the things that we really want to be able to focus on in the adaptation plan, because we want to put our focus and attention on the things, protecting the things that are the most important.
I had to find the unmute button. Thanks, Angie. All right, and so now that we've ranked our assets, we're ready to move on to the next step that Angie mentioned, which is impacts. So here we're going to review data on various extreme heat impacts and, like before, rank the level of risk that it poses to Paula based on several factors. And knowing which impacts are most severe can help us prioritize various adaptation strategies that we want to spend our time, money, and effort pursuing later on. So for each impact, there are three things that we want to consider or look at before making a ranking. And so let's look at this heat-related stress impact section, for example. So the first thing that we want to consider is our related threatened community assets tab, which shows you the community assets that are relevant to this impact, which is heat-related stress, along with the priority level that you selected in the previous step. The second thing that we want to look at is the impact indicators tab, which displays data that measures heat-related stress, illness, and death itself. So In this case, we can see that emergency department visits due to heat and hospitalizations due to heat directly measure heat-related stress, illness, and death. And finally, we have our impact modifiers tab, which displays data on various community characteristics that influence a community's sensitivity or ability to adapt to extreme heat. So for example, certain populations like older adults or young children are more sensitive to the physical impacts of extreme heat, while other populations, like down here, we have workers experiencing high environmental exposure. Other populations are just more exposed to extreme heat and therefore are at greater risk due to their exposure. So we have a variety of demographic characteristics that impact extreme heat sensitivity here. And again, I should note that you can add any indicators here that you want to see later on. You can select add to community profile for any one of these that stand out to you. All right. So to kind of give you an example of how we would make this ranking, because this is a lot of information to consider. Let's use the respiratory illness impact as an example. So in step 4 and the previous step, we ranked physical wellness as a high priority community asset based on the results of the community survey that we got. We'll also review impact indicator data on asthma and asthma emergency room visits that shows a high severity and likelihood for extreme heat, or sorry, for respiratory illness in the community. And then finally, we'll look at impact modifier data that shows a high population of older adults and residents with, older adults and, older adults 65 and older and adults 75 and older. And so since the community ranked physical wellness as a high priority community asset and the tribe has limited capacity to adapt to this threat, we're going to assign this a high vulnerability level. And then Angie, is there anything else that you want to add about kind of summarizing all this information and making a determination here?
Well, this is another sort of unique thing I think we're doing with this tool. So many tools will tell you about the exposure level information, like what's changing in the climate. And then you have to make some leap of imagination about what that might actually look like, how that will affect the impacts on the ground. So this is really the big moment of determining vulnerability. So when we say impacts, we're really looking at where is your community susceptible to certain vulnerabilities that are coming from extreme heat. This is not an extensive list, and we'll get into that. This is the kinds of stuff we were able to sort of scrub and aggregate for you, so it's a lot easier. So this, like at this moment, this is the reality of doing an adaptation plan or a vulnerability assessment. You should be considering what were the severity of the primary and secondary exposures. What does my community care about, right? So what do we want to protect? What does the impact already look like? Do we have data to show us what's changed already, or are there projections for what might change? And then those impact modifiers. So we talk about that as population sensitivity and adaptive capacity. So here we've like rolled it all up in a little plate to say, look at all this and now make a choice about your risk level. And there's more information you could pull in here too. But this has done a lot of the work that you might have to otherwise manually do.
And Scarlett, I see that you have your hands up, but we'll take questions at the end because I just want to make sure we have time to get through the whole demo. But thank you. All right, so that brings us to this community profile step, which you've seen us building over the course of us going through the tool. So far we've evaluated our exposures to extreme heat and related secondary exposures. We've prioritized assets, things like built environment assets and cultural and spiritual assets that we wanted to protect in the face of extreme heat. And we've assessed the risk of various extreme heat impacts to our tribe. And the community profile offers you a summary of everything that you've done so far. So it shows you all the exposures and the risk levels that you've selected for them, as well as any of the data that you've selected to add to the community profile. You'll also see a table with the community assets that you've ranked, organized by the priority level. And finally, you'll see the list of impacts and the risk level you've assigned them. We obviously didn't go through all the impacts, but you would see the risk level if you selected it. And again, under each impact, you'll see each of the community indicators that you wanted to add to the community profile in here. So all of this leads us to this list of adaptation strategies that you see here. So the adaptation strategies that you see here are those that are most relevant to your top ranked exposures, assets, and impacts, so that you can find strategies that might be most useful for your tribe to pursue to increase your tribe's resilience to future extreme heat impacts. Then in addition to helping you evaluate adaptation strategies, this community profile can serve as a helpful reference when you're developing grant applications, drafting climate change assessments, or providing data for communications on future extreme heat threats. Angie, is there anything that you want to add about this section, especially about adaptation strategies here?
EISI, at this stage, this tool is really mainly built for the vulnerability assessment process. And this has become, and EISI has always been a suggestion. Here's a menu of what we know about indicators, and here's the kinds of data sources you can use. And here we're presenting some possible strategies. You know your community best. So anything in here is editable, overridable, right? So like basically these strategies, you might know something much, much better. We're just aggregating some of those strategies that we know and have vetted through our tribal advisors and various tribal adaptation planning processes.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. All right. And so the very last step of this EISI for Extreme Heat tool is this generate report feature. And so this feature generates a Word document that can serve as the basis of an extreme heat vulnerability assessment report. So it's a little bit different than the community profile. It's not just throwing the inputs that you've put into the tool back at you. It's actually doing a lot more. So it does a few things. It summarizes common background information on extreme heat that's applicable to all California tribes. It outlines and it summarizes the ecological, human, and cultural impacts from extreme heat on tribes, including boilerplate information on those impacts. It automatically outputs data from the EISI for Extreme Heat online tool, and it places, it has placeholder text that encourages you to include observational or other tribe-specific data. So a lot of the data that we have in the tool is limited to what's publicly available, but there's also a lot of really rich tribe-specific data and observational data that your tribe holds that we want to encourage you to include in this kind of extreme heat vulnerability assessment. And finally, we also have like different infographics and tables that summarizes some of your inputs from the tool, including your priority selections for assets and risk selections for impacts. And so the way this works is you enter some basic information about your tribe here, like your tribe name, your region, your county, and some information about the authorship and leadership of your tribe. And you'll click Generate Report, and that will automatically download a Word document that's fully editable and fully customizable. I'm not going to download it now, but but yeah, so then you'll be able to edit it and enter, especially for that kind of sensitive or tribal specific knowledge, we want you to have a secure place to do that, as opposed to entering it on a web-based tool. So that provides you an option to include some of that information in a more secure way. And the last thing I'll mention about this is that we'll be doing a full training on this report feature in October, which you can register for through the link in the chat that's going to be posted shortly. And with that, I think we'll actually have some time for questions. So I can actually, we have a few wrap-up slides that I'll pass on to Angie, if I can bring them up.
Great. So I just want to take another moment. Thanks to Shasta for always taking the leap of faith with us and leading the charge here with Paula. And thanks to Colleen and the whole team for having actually made our wildest dreams come true. This is far better than Excel. Holy moly. Now we say, easy adaptation planning made easy, for real this time. The Excel tool isn't as easy as it could have been, but the easy tool still exists over there. And it has all the different exposure levels. So if you're looking for other stuff outside of just extreme heat, it's there. We're always happy to help you with it. And I just say, this is our first foray into this, right? So we would like to continue to build onto this tool, more data, more refinements, more exposures. And so that's where we're hopefully headed next. And just to say thanks again, there's lots of back and forth, things like this tool, this report is a Word tool because for Public Health Alliance, that was hard to do, turning this thing into a Word document that was editable for you all, because we knew how important it was for you not to be asked for sensitive data to be put into some system that you don't control. So lots of good decision making throughout this process. So let's see, what's next? We want to tell you that we think we've made this tool fairly intuitive to use, but there is help. And so the team like Lori and Serena Vega, who, by the way, have worked really hard on the launch of this tool and getting all the guidance together for it, they're going to be available to help you use the tool and as you go through your adaptation or extreme heat planning processes. There is also going to be a full training diving deeper into that report tool, which I think is really going to be good if you're really interested, and that's going to be on October 15th. That report tool, just the last thing I want to say is the EISI for extreme heat data isn't exhaustive. It's not complete necessarily, but that report gives a broader sense of the kinds of information you're going to want to consider as you do your adaptation plan for extreme heat, kind of fills in some gaps and gives you a place to put your tribal knowledge, perspectives, and information. Okay, what did I miss? I think it's time to go to questions.
While we wait for questions, I'm going to add a few things. I want to also acknowledge the California Energy Commission, which gave us the funding for this through 2 rounds of the Tribal Research Grant. And also, I know I take the leap of faith and then I just sort of wander off and let all these wonderful people do the work and then get to come back and get thanked for it. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I mean, yes, obviously I've been a part of it, but I really appreciate the team and all the hard work they've done to get us to this point. Because I remember when Angie first showed me the EISI tool, I curled up under my desk and cried, because I am not an Excel person and it scared the ever living daylights out of me. And I said, we've got to turn this into something where you can just click a drop down and get your information. And holy cow, it's happening. Only for extreme heat so far, but for any of you online right now who work for agencies with money, you've got my number. Help us put this out there for air and water and storms and other human health impacts, and make this thing everything that tribes in California need it to be. So. Last thing too, the report feature, Colleen showed you that it generates this report that you can save. When you open that, it has boilerplate language in there. So it's not just going to have the stuff that you saw on the screen that you then have to add your own text to. It says the stuff. And this was based on the vulnerability assessment that Angie developed for Paula. So you can change that however you want. And it's got spaces in there where it shows, like, I think they're either in red or highlighted or something, where you add your own tribe's name and your own tribe's demographics and specific issues. But so it's what AI would be if AI wasn't the devil. It's amazing. I'm not an AI fan. This took real brains from real people. All right, I'll stop.
I think Scarlett had a question at one point.
I think that I answered my own question. It was a really small one with the impact section, and there was like a vulnerability, kind of a threat and assessment range of high or very high showing up as soon as you opened it. And I think that that was just summarizing what you had put in from the asset section right before. So it wasn't giving you an assessment based on all the data there. It was just kind of pulling it forward and then letting you, okay. Yeah, it was just, I wasn't sure if that was a recommendation or just like filtered through some, yeah. It's incredible. Amazing work, you all. This is really exciting. That was the first one.
Thanks. And if anybody else is confused by that, that's helpful feedback as well. So
We did have conversations like, oh, should we try to like calculate some recommended risk level based on what we know? But I think it's good to present it and allow the users to decide. But thanks. That means a lot from you, Scarlett. We know you guys are data groupies like we are over here and doing good work.
I quickly messaged my colleague, who is an amazing data scientist too, and building very cool apps on our Shiny, because I think that that's what this is built on. Is that correct, Colleen? Oh,
no, we have a custom, really wonderful map developer that we work with called Access Maps, and they developed the Healthy Places Index, and they developed this tools as well.
Okay, very cool. Anyway, just excited to see other helpful tools.
So we had a hand, but then the hand just went down. Was that Tomasio?
Yeah. This Tomasio, Scotts Valley Band of Pomo. I logged in as we were talking, and I tried to check it out so I could move with you guys. But I tried to access my tribe, Scotts Valley, and our federal trust land was we got it in January of 25. And when I was looking on the map, I didn't see it on there. So I just wanted that to be noted. Unless I did something wrong, I don't know. But our federal trust land is now in Vallejo, California. And I just didn't see it there. That's all.
Yeah, so we pull our data from it's
the BIA's data set.
It's the BIA data set. So I don't know how updated that is. I'd have to go and check which version we pulled, but if there's a newer version, it'd be relatively simple to kind of update that in the tool. The version I pulled would have been from about maybe like a year, a little bit less than a year ago. So
the other thing is, Tomasio, you can just click and add a census tract to your data by just clicking on the map. So for tribes that also have non-contiguous lands, you can pick, Vallejo, and then you can pick Mendocino and take over Kashaya.
And that's relevant also to the non-federally recognized tribes who don't have trust lands. Just you can scroll on the map just like you would on Google Maps to your area, and then click on it, and those census tracts will pop up, and you can use those to gather data that's specific to your region. Thank you for pointing that out. You guys get to be our little, beta testers.
Well, thank you. It's a great map, though. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And congratulations on your trust land. That's awesome.
Yeah, since 1991, we're established as a tribe and a federal tribe landless. And so 25 of January, we did get that land. But again, it's not developed, but it's just there. So thank you.
That's good.
Tomasio, if we can help you, we have our technical assistance available. So maybe we can throw that back I think it's in the chat right now. That just means get some one-on-one help on how to use this tool. And if you hit any snags, we're super happy to help.
Thank you.
There was a question in here from Tawny. I don't know if we just want to like lift that up. Let's see, did that get addressed already?
Yeah, Tawny had a bunch of questions. If do you want to come offline or come on off mute and
You all were great at answering them on the fly during the presentation, so kudos to you for that. Yeah, I went through and did a demo of just kind of ran through the tool with you all. I found it really interesting to see the different data that showed up. And I did notice similar mapping thing as Tomasio. When I entered Dry Creek, it did show like a census area for us, but when you go to the final page to generate the report, it didn't show the outline of the area like it did for Paula. So mostly like a note for your team on that. But maybe it's more of a manual thing, like you were saying for Tomasio.
Do you
Yeah,
think
thank you. I can check that out.
we have a place where people can let us know when they're having bugs or problems, right?
I don't think we've set that up quite yet, but we can go ahead and set that up and have that ready.
yeah, I think that would be a great thing to have. And again, relying on BIA trust maps is not always ideal. Their information is not as up to date as we might want it to be. But as long as you're able to identify the census tracts that include the areas of interest for you, like our census tracts includes a big chunk of the La Jolla Reservation too. And that's also usually the deal in places that have small populations. The census tracts tend to be bigger and cover a lot more. So, but you're going to still, heat in La Jolla is pretty much the same as heat in Paula. So hopefully they're not mad that we're overlapping and taking some of their data in our map. But I think we're about to be kicked out of here, y'all. So thank you so much for being here for our demo. And then we'll go back to the boring room with the boring energy people. I'm so mean. But I love this stuff so much more. The energy stuff is boring.
I agree. Thank you so much, everyone.
Especially if you're off grid.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. That booted us promptly at 10:55. So we unfortunately didn't get a chance for questions at the end of our session. So I would encourage you to submit them. I saw one question in the chat. I'd ask for a clarification from Maria on that. Same time, we're going to be having a whole nother hour dedicated to transmission. So we can hopefully, yeah, hopefully we'll have some additional, we'll have time for questions then, unless we want to allow Angie for time for questions. Well, why don't you wrap up, and then if we have time for questions after that.
Okay. At the Tribal Climate Health Projects breakout, we went over a demo of our Easy for Extreme Heat tool, which is just recently went live, and we walked through each of the functions of that tool, which basically makes your process of doing a vulnerability assessment for extreme heat we think far easier. We try to lift the load a little bit of the fact-finding process of gathering all that data and trying to walk you through the decision-making process. And it even spits out a report that's fully customizable. And we have technical assistance that's available to help folks that want to use that tool and think through it in terms of their own extreme heat planning. And it's all available now and for free. And we'll have a further training in October where we're going to go in deeper on how to use the report. So thanks again to Public Health Alliance and Paula and Emission Indians and all the partners we've been working with to get this tool off the ground.
Thanks, Angie. In the TECC-X section, we covered like highly complex, sophisticated transmission wholesale energy markets. So how we get massive amounts of electrons and high voltage to each of the different areas and lower voltage to eventually to your homes. We had a presentation by CPUC and about the providing an overview and also their role in administering in these markets. We had a presentation by Western Resource Advocates and trying to demystify it a bit and share some of the concepts, including the regional transmission organizations and independent system operators, and the day ahead market planning and activities that are going on, and some of the evolution and how that matters to tribes. And we had the California Independent System Operator, or CAISO or CAISO, share their particular role in the really the regional planning coordination of transmission in California and beyond. So we're going to have another session right now that's going to focus on the regional organization of Western Energy, which is an evolution in some of the regional coordination that's occurring. So this is a key opportunity for tribes to influence how transmission projects are planned, how the wholesale markets are operated. So I would encourage you all, if you're able to stay on this TECC-X for the next hour or so. And yeah, so I appreciate you all being here today. I appreciate CAISO and WRA and CPUC for your presentations, and look forward to seeing some of you all join. And if we're going to let everybody go, I might see if we can take a few of those questions we had at the end of our session before transitioning to the next.
Can I just remind folks, all the recording and materials will be provided afterwards. So if you wanted to be in two places at one time, you can always review what was shared in the other breakout.
Great, thanks so much, Angie. Okay, so we're going to transition now into the session co-hosted by TECC and CPUC on Regional Organization for Western Energy, or ROWE, Formation and Tribal Engagement. And before we do that, we did have one question in the chat from Maria. Maria, are you still here? Did you want to ask that question? I needed some clarification on specifically what you were asking about.
I do believe it was something you guys were talking about, the planning of, oh God, remind me.
That was a whole lot covered.
I'm multitasking. I got my boys and I got you guys and I got one other thing going on. So, but I believe it was like the planning of infrastructure or something. And in the planning of anything, it doesn't matter what it is. Historically, nobody ever consults with our local tribes in that area. It don't matter what it is, what it's being done, whether it's building something, implementing something, or anything in our tribal areas. Nobody consults the proper people. Nobody takes the proper protocol to approach our local tribes. And importantly, they don't bring the proper people to the table to have these conversations. And almost always NAGPRA laws are always excluded. And oftentimes, like you see here in Caltrans or in other places, they're doing these what seems to be great, wonderful things, but they're also violating our NAGPRA laws. They're digging up where our ancestors are. And that's what I mean. Did they follow proper protocol? Did they seek the proper consultation? And so that's what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty massive question, because I think there's a variety of agencies. I think Nadine really touched upon that being a major issue, and that CAISO is working on their tribal engagement policy to ensure those proper things are considered. But I'll let Michelle from CPUC address that question.
Yeah, and maybe we can even connect, because I wear many hats, and part of one of my hats is to ensure that all the tribal entities in my region, which is 33 plus, we could find a way to. I'm tired of using that word collaborating, because collaborating, it just, I don't know, there's some disconnect. I would like to start building alliances, not just with our local tribes, but even with the agencies coming in to do work. So if, there's opportunity to build relationships and help each other out in so many different ways.
Yeah. Hi, Maria. My name's Michelle, and I can definitely provide my contact information for you in the chat here. I work for the CPUC, and we are engaged with tribal consultation for projects under construction or future projects coming down the line. So I'll put my name in the chat. And nice to meet you virtually, but look forward to talking with you also.
Yeah, and Maria, thanks for your email and I think there were a number of people here who are trying to lead the way on behalf of their agencies and organizations and engaging with tribes. We'd like to share their contact information with you so that it's not just necessarily CPUC. There's CAISO, there's other organizations as well. So hopefully us meeting today will provide that connection where that can be a greater coordination between these efforts and incorporation of tribal priorities and values and all that. So thank you for the question and for bringing up that concern.
Thank you. And I also dropped my information in the chat in case anybody wanted it. Like I said, I'm right now with our tribal table. We're coordinating a tribal gathering. So if anybody's interested in hearing more about that, I put my email in the chat. I'd love to build alliances with people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we are now going to jump into our bonus session today. So Regional Organization for Western Energy, focused on tribal collaboration opportunities. So Serena is transitioning to the slides from that session. And so we're going to have some of the same speakers we had previously, but kind of shifting the kind of topic itself of really how can tribes engage in the regional organization, Western Energy or ROWE, as an opportunity for tribes to really participate, influence the greater regional planning and management of these wholesale markets. But I'm going to turn it over to the experts on this so they can share a bit more about ROWE and what the opportunities are for tribes to participate and influence it. So I think we're starting with Shannon.
Great, thanks, Josh. So I just wanted to start us off talking a little bit about the Western Energy Imbalance Market, or WEIM, and the Extended Day-Ahead Market, or EDAM, that the CAISO runs and the benefits they provide. And I think that will help frame up the subsequent presentations in this section, kind of on the motivations for the Pathways Initiative. So next slide, please. I showed this slide in my earlier presentation, but the goal here is a reminder of where physically we're located. We're in the Western Interconnection here. Okay, next slide. And we're broken into 9 energy regions across the country, and independent system operators or regional transmission operators, they all perform the same functions of coordinating and controlling and monitoring the operation of the grid, as well as acting as a marketplace for wholesale power for these different regions. So similar to a stock exchange, the ISO never actually owns or takes title to the energy that's purchased and sold, and it only acts as a mechanism to bring the buyers and the sellers of energy and energy services together. Next slide, please. So the ISO is also a balancing authority. Balancing authority is responsible for matching generation and load within a balancing authority area while maintaining the electric frequency of the grid. There are nearly 40 separate balancing authorities in the West, each with the same core functions to prepare for the next day's operations using the resources within their boundaries, as well as taking into account energy imported from neighboring balancing authorities and matching changing supply and demand in real time. So markets are a great way to organize the operations of an electric grid. They fundamentally optimize the usage of a portfolio of generators, and that means finding the cheapest sources we can run consistent with the transmission paths that are available to us. They can also help reduce risks across a footprint by sharing resources across different balancing areas. Next slide, please. So this takes us to the CAISO's Western Energy Imbalance Market. In 2014, we launched the WEIM with CAISO and Pacificor, and this was the first real-time market spanning multiple balancing areas across the West. Before WEIM, trades were done bilaterally across different balancing areas, and there's no way to optimize those transfers or use available transmission effectively. So since 2014, there's been significant expansion of the Western Energy Imbalance Market. And there are now 24 participating entities across 11 states, and it covers approximately 80% of the load in the Western US. It's a real-time energy-only market, and it optimizes dispatch every 5 minutes across all its participants. Documented benefits have been over 8 billion to the participating entities total since we started in 2014. And in terms of reliability, the real-time balancing over a larger footprint than any one single balancing area really gives greater diversity in the load patterns. Weather's bigger than just one area, resource mix is bigger than just one area, so it can really help smooth things out across the whole system. So I mentioned WIM only operates in real time and doesn't optimize the day ahead commitment. So we're going to go to the next slide and talk about the day ahead. So our electric system is largely planned in the day ahead, not in the real time. Around 90% of total load is covered in the day ahead market. And the real time market is really only about that last 5 or 10%. The real-time market's really just for kind of truing up changes and deviations from the day-ahead forecast. And the day-ahead is the main market, and the real-time is kind of that true-up market. So with the WEIM, each balancing authority still plans the day-ahead in isolation, and having that day-ahead isolation with all that opportunity there, this became really the main driver for creating the extended day-ahead market. So EDAM as a concept initiated in 2019 and received approval from FERC in 2023 and 2024, and it just went live earlier this month with PacifiCorp as its first participant. It's a voluntary market, and it helps co-optimize across that wider footprint. So with both of these markets, the EDAM plans ahead and the WEIM fine-tunes in real time. So these both together reflect a broader transition in the West away from a fragmented market toward a more coordinated regional market with the goal to really enhance reliability and reduce costs through leveraging that geographic diversity and enabling large-scale renewable integration. So right now, the governance of the Western Energy Imbalance Market and the Extended Day-Ahead Market are with the CAISO board, which are appointed by the Governor of California. So under a full regional vision for the day-ahead and real-time markets, it would really make more sense to have regional governance. So this leads into kind of the pathways discussion of full regional market and regional governance of that market. So that concludes my presentation, and I think I can hand it to Andrew.
Well, hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Andrew Valinas. I'm a senior associate with RAP, and just want to say thank you for allowing me to come today and to speak to all of you this morning. I'm really grateful to be here. As was just mentioned, I'm going to talk about the West-Wide Governance Pathways Initiative. It's a regional effort in the West to establish an independently governed entity to oversee the two markets that Shannon was just talking about. I can see on the very first slide here, I already have a typo. That is not my email address, but I will get you an updated email address. I'll drop it in the chat in case anyone wants to reach out afterwards. Next slide, please. There's my updated email address. I knew it was somewhere. I work with the Regulatory Systems Project, which is a global NGO founded in the US. And we work on energy transition issues in three main areas: in regulation, policy, and markets. And I'm here today speaking to you all because RAP has been working with decision makers across the West on evaluating and understanding the Pathways Initiative since its inception 3 years ago. So today I want to walk through where the Pathways Initiative came from, what it intends to do, how it intends to do it, and I'll be setting the stage, and then Elaine will be discussing tribal engagement. You'll see that I lean heavily in this presentation on slides created by the Pathways Initiative itself. We felt this is the best way to present the information to you all However, it also means that some of the slides are just a little bit out of date depending on when the Pathways Initiative kind of originally prepared those slides. So I'm going to provide some updates throughout the presentation as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so where did all of this come from? We can jump to the next slide. So in 2023, a group of regulators from Arizona, California, New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington sent a letter to several regional entities and to fellow regulators putting out a call to action on regional market formation. And the letter addressed consumer benefits as the core guiding star on establishing really the broadest market footprint possible that includes participation from California. The letter identified that previous efforts to really harmonize the West in more robust, larger markets failed because of two core issues. One is independent governance, and the other is the respective state policies. And so these two issues were the big ones that came up again and again. And so the regulators put out a call to the region to try and work on solving those two issues. And when I say robust, I mean something more like a regional transmission organization, which is different. The WEIM is quite robust in its regional reach and has been quite a success story. But something more like an RTO is what I'm referring to. So next slide, please. So the regulators put out this letter and the region really responded. So interested stakeholders came together. They formed the Pathways Initiative, establishing what they called the Launch Committee. And the Launch Committee has really been driving the initiative for several years now. It's a group of diverse stakeholders from diverse sectors and different parts of the region. They set up voting and non-voting members. The latter of which is important because that's where state regulators and federal power authorities were as non-voting members. These entities wanted to ensure that they didn't have voting authority, which might have caused kind of issues with their oversight of regulated utilities, for example. But importantly, they set up a stakeholder engagement process to ensure that those who were interested in the effort but were not on the launch committee could get updates and provide input. So next slide. So let's talk about the launch committee. In establishing the launch committee, they began identifying a mission and determining the course of action. And first was establishing their mission. So you can see in the mission here and the language on the screen that there's really a strong reflection of the request from the regulators to focus on independence and creating the largest footprint possible, inclusive of California. A few other items to call out in particular is that the initiative wanted to preserve and build upon the existing market structures that the ISO had. And tied in with that second point, this would help, the second one on the slide there, this would help prevent the need to build from scratch, which can be really costly. So it recognizes, I think, the incredible success of the WEIM, which I mentioned earlier. And this would be a way to build upon that success as opposed to starting over. Next slide, please. So after establishing their mission, the next step for the launch committee was to develop a course of action in establishing this new governance structure for the two markets. So they decided it would be important to have an evaluation criteria to help guide their decision-making on what structure and approach would achieve the goals they had identified. You can see on this slide that once again, the ideas from the regulator's letter of independence, respect for state authority, and maximizing benefits are all echoed really strongly in this criteria. So what they did with this, if we can go to the next slide, is they landed on what they called a stepwise approach. So they recognized that jumping all the way to having, an independent entity was going to take time and was going to be a big lift. So the launch committee identified an impactful first step that could be taken that would signal to the region that this effort is serious, that it is building momentum, and that first step would change the governance of the WEIM and EDAM markets within the constructs of current California laws and current state laws. The step 2 process would then transfer the governance of the two markets to the newly formed independent entity. And then later, Step 3 would focus on the expansion of this new regional organization, or RO, of an expansion of their services and market products being offered. And so I'm going to walk through step 1 and step 2 in a moment. But before we do, let's go to the next slide and we can talk about some updates on kind of where things stand today. So by way of update, there's been a lot of progress, which is really exciting. So first and foremost, California legislation was passed last year that enabled the framework for an independent entity to operate those two markets, the WEIM and EDAM. The new RO, called the ROWE, the Regional Organization for Western Energy, which Elaine will talk more about, was legally founded. And I say legally founded, we'll talk more about this later, but it was established in terms of kind of tax purposes, but they're still sort of building the ROWE, but I'll talk more about that later. And a nomination committee made up of stakeholders across the West is currently working on seating the board for the ROWE, hopefully later this year. So again, I'll return to more context for the updates later, but the point of me sharing these now is to demonstrate that the launch committee has been quite busy over the past few years, and the Pathways Initiative has had numerous successes in their work to date. But let's take a quarter step back and go to the next slide, and we can look at the step 1 proposal. So, as I mentioned before, the step 1 proposal is focused on an impactful change to the governance structure of the existing WEIM and EDAM markets. And what it does is it gives primary decision-making authority over the tariff decisions to the WEM governing body itself. And this is important because it removes the ISO board as the primary decision maker. And this is impactful level of independence. And it also put the WEM governing body on equal footing with the ISO board for any disputes that come up and are sent to FERC to be settled. It also focused heavily and quite strongly on provisions in the charter itself for consumer interest protections and preserving state and local authority. You'll probably hear me say those phrases like a million times during this presentation, but they were really, really important in this whole effort. So that's what step 1 was intending to do. If we go to the next slide, step 1 had a trigger for implementation, and the trigger, you'll see the purpose here written on the slide, expand the geographic footprint of EDAM to accelerate the benefits of greater coordination. The trigger really helped demonstrate that the Western region was serious about these changes and that they were going to support them. There are 2 things that had to happen before the governance changes that I just mentioned would go into effect. And the first is that entities representing a large amount of the load compared to CAISO's load had to sign implementation agreements to join the market. And the second was that there had to be geographic representation from the Northwest and the Southwest. We didn't really have time to go in the full history of Western market development today, but years and years ago, there were efforts to form kind of larger RTOs, and some of them were not as successful as, for example, the WEIM, which was a little more of an incremental approach that the West has generally taken on these things. And so there was the trigger was a way to kind of, again, demonstrate that entities were serious about this, that there was going to be broad representation and broad participation. And so this was really important for the launch committee to have this trigger included in the step 1 proposal. So we can go to the next slide. I'm actually going to skip over this slide, please. Can we go to the next one? Thank you. So this is the more helpful one by way of update. So a few important updates to share. First, the step 1 expansion proposal was the governance proposal was adopted by the CAISO board, and then it was sent to FERC, who also approved it. And importantly, in July 2025, Public Service Company in New Mexico signed an implementation agreement, which ended up triggering the step 1 proposal. So that governance structure is moving forward. And then second, as I mentioned, the California legislature passed legislation that would enable the framework for an independent entity to operate the WEIM and EDAM, which is very exciting. And so with those 2 items, step 1 had been completed. And you can see here that there are other announcements from other regional entities interested in joining EDAM, including Nevada Energy, Idaho Power, Seattle City and Light, and many others as well. So if we go to the next slide, please. Since the step 1 proposal was completed, this meant it was time to work on step 2. And I want to pause for a second and recall that the purpose of step 2 is to stand up a new organization and transfer governance of the markets to that new organization. But it's important to note that the rest of the ISO's functions and responsibilities for their territory are unchanged. So the ISO will still take care of transmission planning in their footprint, reliability coordination, resource adequacy. It's just the energy market governance that's changing with this Pathways proposal. So if we go to the next slide, I'm not going to walk through each one of these, but I am going to talk about some of them. And really, the slide demonstrates the different ways that the step 2 proposal it's intending to achieve independent governance. Like I said, I'll talk about some of these, but you can see there are a lot of them. And it's the ways that the launch committee is designing the organization to ensure that it's fully independent. Things like having its own independent board, their own staff, their own Section 205 filing rights, which has to do with control over tariffs and interaction with FERC. And this is kind of a nuanced technical point, but a really important one. But I want to dig a little bit more into some of the other kind of independence elements as part of the step 2 proposal. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Okay, so the step 2 proposal suggests establishing a 501c3 as the tax status for the entity. The launch committee looked at a number of different options, including how the RTOs in the East are established and how the ISO, the California ISO, is established. And they determined that a 501c3 made the most sense. It's a public benefit organization, and it won't be able to lobby or engage in political activities. It will be incorporated in Delaware, and this is quite common, in my understanding, for multi-state entities just because of Delaware's tax laws. They're simply easier to work with. But importantly, the principal place of business will, of course, be in the West. And on the slide here, it says TBD because the launch committee wants to leave that decision up to the new RO board since they're the ones that are going to be operating this new entity. However, as a practical matter, there is consideration for Folsom, California, because that's where the ISO offices are. And so there'd be benefits to being close to them because they're the entity operating the market. So also the board meetings will rotate around the Western states participating in the market so as not to kind of favor any particular state. So, the RO has to have its principal place of business somewhere, but the launch committee is really trying to emphasize that they're not trying to give preference to any one state, and they want this to be a really regionally represented and regionally owned entity. Next slide, please. In terms of governance, the step 2 proposal suggests a 7-member board. It would not reserve any seats or restrict the number of seats for the existing WEM governing body. So if any of those individuals are interested in serving, they can move just right to the nomination process. And I'm going to talk more about some of these other elements in a moment. So we can actually, we can move to the next slide, please. Okay. So defining the public interest, the step 2 proposal focuses heavily on the public interest protections, but that term needed to be described so that everyone involved in the effort, everyone reading about the effort and learning about the effort was on the same page. So what you see on the slide here are the 2 intertwined components that formed the core of the public interest discussions. Once again, a focus on consumer interests and on respecting state and local policies. And I'll, once again, say that this goes all the way back to the regulator's letter from 2023. We have such a checkered board of state policies in the West, especially on energy issues, that it was important that this be baked into that decision. We can go to the next slide. So what did these public interest protections look like? They showed up in a number of different ways. And in the board, for example, there's a corporate obligation, not just like a goal or a vision. but an actual obligation in the founding documents to respect state authority and public interest. And the proposal suggests a public policy committee of the board. So it's actually a subcommittee of the board itself, which will be tasked with engaging decision makers before the board takes action in order to inform them on how the board's actions may impact public policies. The proposal also suggests creating an independent consumer advocacy organization within the RO that will have funding from the tariff. So this is an important way for consumer advocacy organizations to have a strong impact in the discussion and decisions made by the regional organization. Next slide, please. So just a few more on the public interest protections. Next, there was the proposal to create an Office of Public Participation. And this isn't like a consumer complaint office. Instead, it's more heavily focused on engaging and educating the public on activities of the RO and the markets and facilitating participation in the process. So actually engaging the public, educating them, and getting them involved. The RO is also going to transfer the independent market monitor function from the WEM to the RO, so that's going to be maintained. And importantly, this entity is going to be responsible for ensuring that information and data sharing for state commissions and consumer advocates is appropriate and moves forward. And this is a really critical role that really shouldn't be undervalued, is making sure that information is flowing to decision makers who need it. And then, of course, more stakeholder engagement opportunities, which I'll talk a little bit on the next slide. So we can go to the next one, please. One of the primary ways that stakeholders can have a voice in the new RO is through this proposal for the new Stakeholder Representatives Committee. And the committee intends to have representation from different sectors. So things like investor-owned utilities versus public utilities versus energy developers, public interest organizations, and they'll have voting protocols as well. And there will be an ability to create a stakeholder initiative that can move through a stakeholder engagement process and eventually be proposed to the RO board itself. So, stakeholders have the opportunity to, even if they're not on the board, they have an opportunity to, through this process, get ideas and initiatives to the board if it moves forward in that way. Okay, let's see. So where does that take us? Let's talk a little bit more about some of the recent activities which are being handled by the Formation Committee. So on the next slide, once the Step 2 proposal was finished in its proposal form, after the California legislation was passed last year and after the Step 1 trigger was hit, it was then time to begin working on implementation of Step 2 and actually setting up the new organization. So the launch committee set up a subcommittee made up of 10 members, and they called it the Formation Committee. And their task was formation. It was implementation, and they report on their progress back to the launch committee members. So the launch committee is still involved. But the Formation Committee set up a work plan for really 3 distinct stages of formation of the RO. There were certain activities that had to wait until different things happened, such as the passing of the California legislation, seating of the new RO board, but they really wanted to make as much progress as possible in the meantime. So this is an active committee. It's doing a bulk of the work today. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about some of the updates. So here's where we are today. The Formation Committee was successful in incorporating the ROWE, which required establishing a temporary formation board. And this is simply because in order to establish an organization, a 501c3, you have to have an existing board. So the formation board is only temporary. It's not meant to have any decision-making authority. And the Formation Committee is focusing on searching right now for the ROWE board members that will take over governance of the organization, which will, at that point, replace the formation board. But in the meantime, the Formation Committee and Launch Committee are preparing documents for this new RO board to get them fully up to speed on all of the history of the Pathways Initiative effort, Step 2 proposal, and that will include documents related to public outreach and engagement, and things like that. I'll also mention there's some resource adequacy discussions going on in the West. We don't have to get into the details today, but the Launch Committee and the Formation Committee are following those as well. So what's coming next for this effort in the near term? This fall is really focused on the ROWE board this summer and fall. The formation committee hopes to seat the board by later this summer or early fall, and then get them up and running, hiring staff and beginning operations. And then in the medium to long term, once the board is set up, then the new ROWE board will take over and begin establishing formal governance, start working on their tariffs, and start working on engaging with the various stakeholder groups and overseeing the two markets. So it's probably not lost on you all that I didn't talk much at all about tribal engagement during that presentation, but I am now done with my slides and will pass it to Elaine, who will pick up that thread and carry it forward.
Hi there. Thanks, Andrew. That was great. You can go to the next slide. So again, I'm Elaine Ginocchio. I'm a consultant now. I work primarily for Western Resource Advocates, and my area of expertise has become governance of regional organizations. I've been doing this for, about 15 years, because previously I was with the Western Interstate Energy Board, and that's what I was doing with them as well. I've been involved in governance development in a number of organizations, some that a prior speaker talked about, SPPs, governance structures, etc. And I'm very involved in Pathways Initiative. You can see all the areas that I'm working on, including the Launch Committee and Formation Committee. You can go to the next slide. By the way, am I speaking loud enough? Can somebody tell me if I am or aren't? I'm told I sometimes don't.
You sound good, Elaine.
Thanks. Okay. So I was asked, thank you, Peter, too. I was asked to answer a number of, keep going, there was a duplicate slide, to answer 3 questions. Why does ROWE matter to tribes, and what changes will take place? How can tribes meaningfully participate in the ROWE? And then what factors should tribes consider in their energy and land use planning process to prepare for the transition to the ROWE? I think the information I'll provide you will provide answers to all of these, and you can go to the next slide. So what I really want to hit home are some terms. You've heard a lot of information. If you walk away understanding these, I think I've been a success. So the ROWE, the Regional Organization for Western Energy, this is a legal corporation that will oversee the WEAM and EDAM rules as early as 2028. Andrew talked about that. The Pathways Initiative. This is a group of volunteers who developed the final proposal for the ROWE governance through a 2+ year process, and are now turning that 162-page proposal into draft policies, which I'll talk about later on how to get opportunities for engagement today. All the draft policies that are developed by the Pathways Initiative volunteers must be approved by the ROWE board after it's established. We're basically providing some work for them, so when they get up and running with a very limited staff, things can move along. The EDAM and the WEAM are wholesale energy markets operated by the CAISO with volunteer regional participation. Both markets already have FERC-approved tariffs, and both are up and running. When oversight authority for the WEAM and EDAM tariffs is transferred to the ROWE, any changes to those tariffs will then be overseen by the ROWE. However, CAISO will continue to operate those markets. So if you just grasp that, because there are a lot of terms involved with this, you're doing really well. So you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to repeat a slide from Andrew's. What happens when the ROWE is up and running in January 2028? As early as January 28. These are all of CAISO's functions. The one function whose moves to a different board are the energy markets. All those others remain under CAISO and CAISO's current board of governors. Go to the next slide. And we're going to look at it another way. So right now you have the CAISO board of governors, and then you also have a regional board called the governing body, and they are responsible for the WEAM and EDAM rules. That includes the tariff as well as business practices and policies affecting those two markets. The CAISO board also has responsibility, all the other 6 other responsibilities that CAISO has. You can go to the next slide. What happens when the transfer takes place of authority? This happens. That one area, the WEAM and EDAM rules, now is under the ROWE board of directors. All the other areas of CAISO's responsibility stay under the CAISO board of governors. And because they moved to a new board of directors, you don't need that intermediary board, the governing body anymore. And the big point here is that previous, can you go to the previous slide? It's a little bit of the location. Can you go to the previous slide? Yeah, the location of the governing body is a little bit misleading right now because of the changes Andrew talked about that have recently taken place. It really is more side by side with the CAISO Board of Governors, but they do still have some oversight and authority over the two regional markets. And as a previous speaker said, we're moving from 5 to 10% of load to like 90% of load. And so the West was a little uncomfortable with that, with so much of their load going into this regional market. And so you can move forward again. And so that's why now the CAISO Board of Governors won't have any authority over the WEME and EDAM rules. It will be this independent ROWE Board of Directors. You can go to the next slide. So what does not change when this happens? Transmission planning will not change when the ROWE assumes authority over the EDAM and WEME rules. It will continue the way it is now unless and until the ROWE participants want the ROWE to offer this service, and participation in that will be voluntary. So we built the ROWE that you can add services on, but they won't be added unless participants want them, and they will always be voluntary in terms of who would participate in that. So whatever you're doing now for transmission planning, that stays exactly the same wherever you are located in the West. Resource adequacy, including the interconnection process, same thing. That will not change unless and until the ROWE participants want to include that service. And again, it would be voluntary. So whatever you're doing now about the interconnection process, it stays the same. Will not change means the ROWE will not impact how these services are planned, approved, or planned, approved, or implemented. One advantage, though, of going to regional market is you will now have more transparent information from the markets that can help identify resource needs like transmission. So in that way, I don't know if you call it a change, but it's very helpful and will help in that process. You can go to the next slide. Okay, what are the opportunities now for participating in the ROWE and the Pathways Initiative? So as Andrew said, the ROWE board nomination process is underway. This is the link for the position description. The deadline for applications is June 30th. I will mention diversity is a core principle, diversity of experience, diversity of geographic diversity, diversity of background. So what you can do now is socialize the position description to qualified candidates. And again, the slide deck is going to be available for you. We expect the first board of 5 to be named by the fall of this year. You can go to the next slide. Participating in policy development right now. So as I said, the Pathways Launch Committee put together a 162-page proposal of draft policies. And no one's expecting to read 162 pages, but if you read the first 10, it gives you a really good idea. It's a good summary of everything and has a really nice detailed table of contents so you can focus on things you're interested in. But what we're doing right now is taking that very long document and turning it into draft policies that would then be approved by the ROWE board. We're using an open and transparent process. Basically, after we work through policies internally through the working group and then the formation committee and the launch committee, they get published and you get notices if you're on the distribution list. And then we'll have a public meeting on them where you can give your feedback verbally. And we also will have a period that you can provide feedback in written comments. So you can get involved in that way. Examples of policies currently under development would be the Office of Participation. We're doing the scope of work for that right now. It should be published pretty soon for that process to start. And then the stakeholder process for the ROWE. We're also working through that. And that's probably a number of months off before that gets published and we go through the public meeting process. So how to get involved? Attend public meetings and submit written comments. The regular public meeting is the 4th Friday of each month. That's the webpage for information about the dates and the sign-in connection information. Also, whatever documents we're going to discuss at the public meeting will be posted at that site. Also, if you are not I have all the time in the world to go to sites and check what's going on, you can get on that stakeholder distribution list and they will send you notices directly about everything that's happening. Just send an email to that email address and say, I want to be on your distribution list. And they will tell you when meetings are coming up, send you materials that are posted and that sort of thing. So the next slide. This is just, so at some point in the future, if you think you're going to be involved in the EDAM or EIM, you will be in the ROWE's governance structure. We are happy to come back and talk to you more about how you involve, how you stakeholder in there. It was a little too much information for today. I'm giving you a bird's eye view of a lot of things today. This was just to say that the core governance structure of these organizations is typical. You have a board, a stakeholder process, and a states committee, and Andrew went through some of that. What we're really proud of are the ROWE add-ons, because I think we do add a lot about public interest protections and helping those who, or I'm going to say, are not professional stakeholders in these things, understand and engage in the process. You can go to the next slide. And just our perspective as public interest organizations, and from our perspective, we're not heavily funded. We can't attend everything we need to, and we aren't market participants. So sometimes our voices may not seem as important. But in this governance structure, we're really, really proud of it, because we do think they do a good balancing of interests in there, that our voices are not drowned out from process or structural elements. And it's just some of the things that some organizations will have that to us drown our voice out and make it harder for us to participate, that the ROWE does not have. So having appropriate sector definitions is great. Sometimes we get shoved into a everyone else sector, which drowns our voice out. We are not in this. There are no fees to participate. You can participate fully on committees and vote without paying a fee. They allow substitutes, which we use frequently, and no strict attendance rule. If you don't show X number of times, you're kicked out. That does not happen. The voting provides a fair voice. We like the voting structure. And they have additional support to facilitate engagement, which Andrew talked about. And a lot of this, they talk about there's staff support to help organizations fully participate in some of the ways you do in the stakeholder process, but also the Office of Public Participation is very helpful. And then the suite of public interest protections, it's very unique, the broad amount of public interest protections in this organization. We think it should serve as a national model. And this is important because you do get tensions in markets between participants, larger participants, and where they want to go, versus the larger public interests, such as grid reliability, environmental impacts, and economic interests of smaller or non-participants. And public interest protections help balance that out, which we think is really important when you get into markets. So you can go to the next slide. So the newest thing we've done is the Pathways Tribal Engagement Working Group. So the purpose of this is to assess the ROWE's processes as we envision them now in that document for accessibility and meaningful opportunities for tribal participation. The ultimate goal of this working group is to develop a tribal engagement plan for the ROWE, which can include recommendations for improvements to both the proposed organizational structure as well as processes within that structure. And examples of questions for tribes to consider would be, for example, at the leadership level. Would a states committee be a good fit for tribal leadership? Are there other options for the stakeholder process that are organized by sectors? Do tribes feel like in the areas they want to engage in, do these sectors fit them? Or would they think a tribal sector would fit better, or both, or none? The third is modifications to the structure. I mean, do traditional structures work for tribes? Should we start thinking outside of the box? So the first step the Tribal Engagement Group Working Group has done is we've reached out through the WRA tribal workshop and have a handful of tribal representatives that are going to come talk to us about these questions, but also how should this engagement look right now? Like, should we be looking at workshops? Should we be looking at meetings? Should we be looking at a joint working group of tribal representatives and current Pathways Formation Committee folks? So it's what process should we be using to develop this work product as well as developing this work product? You can go to the next slide. Yeah, there you go. So we have 15 minutes for questions. All right, thank you. And I appreciate you having me here and being engaged in this group.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elaine and Andrew, for all of that information and for helping put some greater perspective for tribes. We do have a few questions in the chat we'll go to first, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So Peter Wells from San Diego County asked, will CCAs have an opportunity for representation on the public policy and oversight committees, so community choice aggregators?
So community, Andrew, you want me to go ahead and start?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. There is a sector that CCAs would be in. So you have a stakeholder. It's gosh, I can't remember which one it is, Andrew. It's not CCAs alone.
No, I can't remember what it's called either, but they were specifically contemplated.
Yeah, and they are represented on the launch committee. They are a sector that's on the launch committee that's helping develop all these proposals.
And the formation committee too, I believe. Isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. So
Yeah. And what was the second part of the question? Oh, the oversight committees. That oversight committee you're talking about, that's going to be composed of members of the board. So the board itself will have board members on that public policy committee. It's at the highest level.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next question in the chat is, and in the meantime, anybody else can enter more questions or raise your hand and we can unmute you. But Gail asks, will all this top-heavy governance help with reliable energy supply? And is the grid protected from EMP? I believe that's electromagnetic pulse.
Well, Elaine, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. I mean, my reaction to this is that I think the key thing to focus on here is that this is governance of the two energy markets. So the reliability coordinator function still remains with the ISO, and that's wholly untouched from this. So actually, I'd invite anybody from CAISO to weigh in on this question too. But
I agree with Andrew in terms of the reliability coordinator function, and then one of the functions of the markets is intended to help ensure that the system is balanced in the most efficient way. And so the governance of an oversight of the market rules are what helps ensure we achieve that. So I think it's an interesting question in terms of top heaviness and how that influences rules. I think that's something that might depend on different folks' perspectives on benefits and risks there.
Well, thank you for that. Gail, you let us know if that didn't adequately address your question. Maria asked, how can we get on the board? I believe that was addressed previously, and they're recruiting for board members right now through the end of June. I dropped essentially the recruitment link in the chat that provides, I think, a significant amount of detail on that, but I think it would be really great to get that circulated and hopefully we get some strong tribal representation or at least candidates. So Kate asked, what is the process for selecting the ROWE board from the nominees? Will the launch committee make the selection? Will the board seats be designated for specific stakeholder groups?
I can take a first shot at that. So there is a sector-based nominating committee that's working on that. So of all the, I think, 12 sectors that have been working on this, there's one person from each on this nominating committee, plus a state representative, a state commissioner, and then I think there's a launch committee member, but they don't vote. But anyway, the sector-based nominating committee does the first round. They're doing really all the work. We've hired a firm that specializes in executive placements that has done this with markets before, that's working with them. We've put together what we're looking for in a board. That was also in that 162-page proposal. The process is also written up and posted on the Pathways Initiative launch committee page, so you can see the process that we're using. So the sector-based launch committee works with this executive search firm with criteria that was put together by the whole group and also put out for public comment, the criteria we're using. They then nominate the five that they think should be the first board. Now, in the long term, there'll be a board, and the board will be approving nominations when board seats open up. But for this, since we don't have a first board yet, it will be the launch committee sort of giving a thumbs up or down, and the formation board approving the first five, because we're at the first board stage. What was the other part of the question? There was the process and...
process, and then will the launch committee make the selection? Will the board seats be designated for specific stakeholder groups?
No, the board seats will not be designated for any stakeholder groups, but One of the criteria you have is to have the group represent a diverse set of backgrounds. So you're not going to get 5 IOUs on there or 5 retired IU executives. So when you look at the criteria, even though none are designated, you have to be this, this, or this, we would like the whole 5 to represent a broad range of sectors and backgrounds.
Will they ultimately share who was considered and who wasn't selected, or?
I don't know if they do because, people have jobs and they're applying for jobs, and that's usually information that you know what I mean? You don't want your current employer to know about when you're applying for a new job. But there is the sector-based process. The representative on the committee is going back to their sector throughout the process and saying, here's where we are now. Here are the candidates we are considering. What do you, my sector, think? What should I take back to the committee in terms of what do you think about these candidates? And we actually will rank them. Each sector ranks them, and they're represented on the committee that comes back with their sector's ranking to the full discussion. But we don't make them public just because it's people making employment decisions, and that can, mess things up for their current job.
All right, so the next question from Maya is, what is ROWE doing to build internal tribal law, trust law / trust / engagement, etc., expertise and uplifting that expertise within the decision processes?
Well, that was a excellent question, and that was the reason that we started the Tribal Engagement Working Group, because that's what we want to try to do right now is work with tribes instead of us saying, here's what we're doing, work with tribes and ask them what will work with you. So that's where we are right now.
Well, Kate's excellent follow-up question anticipating, how do we get engaged with the tribal group that you mentioned?
I'm so sorry I don't have my email in here. I'll drop my email into the chat. Just get in touch with me, send me a quick email.
Okay, and our follow-up, we can share more information on that, and so is that the process? Just contact you, Elaine?
For now, and also you can also again ask to be on the the distribution list for the Pathways Initiative and tell them what your interest is. So it's officially in there. But yeah, if you drop me your email information, then once we figure out what the process is going to look like, we'll make sure that you're engaged in that.
Okay, thank you for Nadine for dropping Elaine's email in the chat. Any other questions? Anybody want to raise their hand and we can unmute you? So I guess kind of want to, it'd be helpful maybe to even jump back to the questions you had. Oh, sorry. Maria and then Elaine.
Yeah, I missed a lot of the links, and so I'm dropping my email in the chat, and it's because I'm multitasking. I'm really sorry for that. I apologize, but I am interested in serving on a lot of the things that you guys have been mentioning, and not only for myself, but for a lot of my tribal members who sit on our tribal board. So I'm dropping my information, my email, and if you guys could forward that to me, I would be so eternally grateful.
Sure thing, Maria. It'll actually, we'll include it in the follow-up, and it's in the slide deck. There's a slide called Opportunity Now that has a link to the board position, and then we'll include information on joining the working group, which is separate from the overall ROWE board.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and I think I say it for everybody who wears many hats like I do. Thank you. That it's so helpful when you guys do that. Thank you.
Sure
I'll
thing.
shut up now.
No worries. Thank you for joining and sparing what time you can. Elaine? I was just going to add, and you don't have, we are always open to public comment. It's not just that cycle of periods. If the email I gave you about contacting Pathways Initiative to be in distribution list, you can also send them anything you want. You can tell them what you think about tribal engagement if you have ideas right now. And again, we're always open to taking public comments, not just during public meetings and certain cycles. Thanks for that. I don't see any additional questions right now. Feel free to chime in, or I feel like it'd be helpful to go back to some of the original questions you had on the questions you wanted to cover, maybe briefly summarize those again. I mean, I think like you talked about how tribes can meaningfully engage both through the board and through the working group. The changes that are going to happen to the different authorities, but I think it'd be helpful to reiterate why it matters. Why does ROWE matter to tribes, and first and foremost, and then what factors should tribes consider in their energy and land use planning processes to prepare for the transition? You just like said, bring it full circle. That'd be awesome.
Yep. So why does ROWE matter? Well, if you're planning on participating in the EDM or EM markets, the ROWE will be the governance structure. That the ROWE and its structure will be the decision-making body for the rules in those markets. So although the markets are fully developed and their tariffs are approved by FERC, what happens now is what happens in every market. You're constantly changing it. You're either like correcting something, making an improvement. So if you want to affect the rules of the market, and I think if you're participating in the market, that will be your biggest interest, then you probably want to be engaged in the ROWE and how the rules are made and the rules are changed. And I think I covered what changes are taking place. It's just moving from the board, the CAISO board and the secondary board to the ROWE board. But although you have a new board, a different board, the stakeholder process will change a little bit. And so that means how you make the rules and how you change the rules. That process will change a little bit from, a bit from how CAISO does it now. In terms of how you can meaningfully participate, I think I explained now how you can, what we're doing right now. In the end, in terms of, like I said, we're developing the stakeholder process right now. So we developed a pretty detailed plan for what the stakeholder process is going to look like when the ROWE has authority, which that means early 2028. Right now, if you plan on participating in that market, you probably want to be engaged now in how that stakeholder process they're going to use will develop. Because if you're going to be in the market and you want to impact change, you want to make sure that stakeholder process works for you. So I would say pay attention when the draft of the stakeholder process policy comes out, and being in that conversation right now, because that will be the stakeholder process we use beginning early 2028 when the ROWE has authority. In terms of right now, I told you we can do, socialize the board, the board job description, and also right now be involved in the draft policies we're developing. The third question, what factors should tribes consider in energy and land use planning processes? I think I explained nothing about transmission planning is changing right now, nor IRP process. So I would say, I don't know what would change because the ROWE isn't affecting that. So however you're doing it now, that is the way it's going to keep happening for the near term for a number of years. Does that?
Yeah, I appreciate you it's helpful to kind of, covering a lot of information. So appreciate you circling back to just summarize that. We have one final question, and then feel free to send questions afterwards. Maya asks, is there a rural working group for ROWE?
No, there is not a rural working group for ROWE. I'm so sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head the 12 sectors. I'm a day off of vacation, so I have vacation brain. The 12 sectors that have been participating in developing this plan, and if there is a muni co-op sector. Can I answer that question afterwards? But we don't have a working group specifically doing munis and co-ops, but I do believe they're incorporated into one of the sectors that have been developing the proposal.
They are. Yeah. And Elaine, again, I can't remember the exact name of that sector as well, but they are incorporated into there.
Oh, and thank you so much.
I think it was public power. It might have been the public power sector.
Yeah, I can check that. I'll double check that and make sure I get information out, Josh. But you should get in touch with, if you're interested in what's happening in those specific sectors, get in touch with your person because we have their names and contact information on the webpage. I'm going to ask them, if you want to get engaged now or what's been happening, or if you think, you like the proposal in terms of how it affects your sector. So Josh, what I'll do is I will get you that list so they know who their contacts are.
Wonderful. Well, appreciate Elaine, Andrew, Shannon, everybody here today. And for those that stayed on maybe for the full 2 hours, this was somewhat of a deep dive, although just scratching the surface. on this, but it's an opportunity right now. Hopefully, we'll see some strong participation, not just beyond the working group, but on the board itself. And we're going to kind of take the information we're receiving back and consider future transmission planning, TECC-X events and activities. So thank you to the CPUC, CAISO, WRA, RAP, everybody here today for spending all your time with us. And I hope you all have a great week.